So I'll be the first to admit that an RTX 2070 wasn't ever really a 4K card even when it launched. And now we're in the middle of 2021 and I'm doing a video about is an RTX 2070 a 4K card? And now you're watching me over here in Cyberpunk, and if you're looking at the top left hand of the screen, you're seeing that we're only getting about 30 frames per second. Well, what I really want to investigate in this video is there's been so many games getting both DLSS and or FSR added to them lately that I'm curious if, despite the fact that the 2070 is aging, if it's actually now become more of a 4K capable card than ever before. So we're here at a game that launched right at the beginning of 2021, well, technically the end of 2020, although now it's had a lot of patches, and okay, sure, I'm getting 30 frames per second. But let's go ahead and show you my settings. For one thing, I'm not on exactly ultra settings. I've turned down just a few things. I did this based on the recommendations from Digital Foundry. So you can see I've set Cascaded Shadows Resolution to medium, Volumetric Fog to medium, Volumetric Cloud Quality to medium. I've set Ambient Occlusion to low, Color Precision to medium, Mirror Quality to medium. And that was getting me about 30 frames per second. But if we now kick on DLSS to quality, we're gonna get actually pretty playable performance here. Let me reset my averages. You can see my current frame rate on the left, followed by the frame time, if you're interested in that, the average in the middle, and the 1% lows at the right. Let me actually reset that to get that 1% low more realistic there. Okay, so here we are with DLSS quality. Now, this is one of the more difficult scenes in the game, in the city with traffic and lots of pedestrians. And over here, we're in, the mid 40s, and I'm playing with a controller on my couch right now, and things look really good and are quite playable. In motion, lines in this game, when you're using DLSS, get a little bit of this shimmery quality to them that aren't there nearly as much at native, as well as possibly getting some ghosting on, car lights as they go by. It may or may not show up in this particular scene. Although you could look at a video I've done recently about manually swapping out to a DLSS 2.2 implementation to improve on image ghosting in certain games. Now, if you're willing to go down to DLSS balanced, which does get a little bit more of a trade-off, but hey, if you're like me playing back on a couch or something, it can actually still look pretty good. We can actually now get very close. Let me reset my counters here. Actually, right here, we're at 60 frames per second and above, and if I get down into the city with the traffic, one of the more demanding areas in the game, again, many places you'll get much better performance than this, we're actually still in the 50s. And overall, this feels really good, especially on a controller on my couch. I'd be a little more hesitant with a mouse here, but we're not talking about the best gaming situation of all time. We're talking about trying to use an RTX 2070 at 4K. All right. So I would say that, yeah, in Cyberpunk, you can definitely get some very good looking and playable frame rates and graphics settings in 4K. Let's take a look at Red Dead Redemption 2, which recently got a DLSS update. Let's see what we can do with that one. Okay, here we are in Red Dead Redemption 2, and I'm not even gonna show you trying to run the game at ultra settings at 4K, because that's just silly. The ultra settings in this game are ridiculous. Now, this is not using any kind of DLSS, and you can see that our frame rate is struggling, but the game still looks pretty good here. Let me show you the settings that I'm actually using. And then we'll try kicking on some DLSS and see what the trade-offs are. So first of all, I'll just say that the settings I'm using here are basically the hardware unboxed recommended settings. So huge thank you to the guys over there. And I'm showing you these settings right now, even the advanced graphics settings tweaked. A lot of things are adjusted here from Ultra, and it gets you a huge performance benefit at very minor visual quality trade-off. Although notice that if you did bump lighting quality up to high, it helps with the moonlight. So in night scenes, that can be somewhat noticeable. Let's kick on DLSS to quality and see where it gets us. All right. So our frame rates are still not absolutely amazing, but this camp scene is fairly demanding, to be honest. And we're at least pushing up into the around 50. Let me reset the frame rate counter for the averages. I should probably do that. And I would deem this completely playable on a controller, although again, obviously people would prefer a locked 60. I mean, again, we're talking about an RTX 2070 at 4K. Things aren't going to be perfect. Now, if you're willing to go down to the more aggressive presets on the DLSS, like balanced, we can get more of a performance jump, but I have not been super impressed by the lower settings here getting much higher in terms of frame rate. So you can see here we're getting close to the middle 50s. Now, what sort of visual trade-offs do you get in this game? The main thing that you get is this hair with a bit of a checkerboarding pattern on it. It looks like there's lines in it. Now, I will say that it's much less noticeable to me at 4K than it is to me when playing the game on my 1440p monitor. Now, I will also say that you do occasionally get a bit of ghosting. Things aren't perfect. But I also usually notice a little bit of visual improvements. I feel like sometimes certain textures look a bit sharper with DLSS. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I would say if you want to use the DLSS, I'd probably recommend wearing a hat. So hats on for DLSS. Again, I'll show you if I turn off DLSS and then you look at the hair, and I've investigated this a ton in other videos, that I think the hair looks significantly better without DLSS adding that bit of a checkerboarding pattern to it. So let's go ahead and take a look. See here, you can see the hair does not normally have those checkerboards on it. Okay, so in Red Dead Redemption 2, I can say that as long as you're willing to use the Hardware Unboxed optimized settings and then kick on a bit of DLSS, at least to the quality setting, we can get ourselves a pretty playable experience with honestly very good looking graphics, even in Red Dead Redemption 2. Let's hop over to Resident Evil 8, which is currently my favorite game of the year. That one doesn't have DLSS, but we do have FSR. Okay, here we are in Resident Evil Village, or Resident Evil 8. I love this game. And if I show you my settings, I've basically used the maximum preset. So from the main menu, you can set presets. I just went on maximum. I don't think I've changed much since then, but just go ahead and take a look. If I'll scroll through it there for you. You might panic that it says this needs 12.7 gigabytes of VRAM. Don't panic. Let's take a look at how it does. Notice I'm not using FSR yet. In this scene, I'm getting in the mid to upper 40s, maybe even the 50s. I'll reset the averages. Now, if you walk out into one of the more demanding scenes, I found that this village over here is one of the more demanding scenes in the game. We do now drop below 40 from time to time. By the way, I've got the frame time monitoring up there too. So like if I was getting hit hard for being over my VRAM limit, we would see a little bit more stuttering and things like that. And by the way, if you wanted me to prove it to you, let's go ahead and lower our, what is it called? Our texture. So if I lower the textures, it should drastically decrease our VRAM usage, and we can see whether or not that really affects our frame rate. So if I go way down to like low or medium here, let's go all the way down to low on texture quality. If I don't get a big boost in frame rate, and hey, look, I don't, then what does that tell you? It tells you that my frame rate here was not, and my frame times were not really limited by the VRAM issue. I had people arguing with me in my FSR video comments that, this doesn't count because my 8 gigabytes isn't doing it. Just don't get scared by that graphics setting menu. I'm not saying you can't find a scene where it would matter in the game, but for most of the game, you're going to get, you're not really being penalized hard for this. I'm not getting bad frame times. This is on the low textures, and kicking the textures back up for the rest of our testing here. Oops. Display, there we go. So kicking our textures back up to maximum, we're going to see that our performance, again, it stays about the same. So, don't panic. Okay. Now, if you also try to kick on ray tracing, maybe it has some issues, but since we're looking at 4K performance here, you can tell that this isn't great. So how about FSR? How does FSR do? I've already done a video testing FSR in this game, but honestly, while it's not my favorite implementation of FSR, at 4K, it's not terrible if you need the frame rates, if you leave it to ultra quality. And let's see what sort of performance jump we get. I'll reset the averages. You can see that now we're up here at 58 frames per second at this particular scene. As I move around, hey, we're up, you know, in the 50s and 60s. This feels pretty dang good. At what trade-off? Well, you can really look back at my video on this, but some of the fine details in the trees and the grass are clearly less defined when using ultra quality. But look at this. Other than that, I have the game maxed out minus ray tracing, and just with the ultra quality getting us a slight decrease in visuals. This is the game maxed out at 60 frames per second. This grass is a good place where you can see the trade-off, by the way. I'll just go ahead, and for anybody who didn't watch the other video, I didn't want controls, I want display. And if you look at the details on the grass and then compare it to having this off, I do find the graph to be sharper with it off. But for the jump going from like 44 up to 60 frames per second, if I have to game at 4K on my RTX 2070 in this game, I think I'm going to stick to FSR on. All right, let's take a look at another game and make some final conclusions. Okay, here we are in Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. This is another game where back when it first launched, we didn't have a 2.0 implementation of DLSS to help us out. It had 1.0, which I consider pretty much unusable, looked ugly. But now, like I said, we're seeing things improve. With this Enhanced Edition, well, you might be like, well, you have 30 frames per second. Well, that's because I don't have DLSS turned on. So now with the Enhanced Edition, we get a really good implementation of DLSS, and we also have better ray tracing settings. Notice I have my quality settings here at high, not ultra, and motion blur turned down to low, just kind of personal preference there, but, you know, I'm right. Anyway, ray tracing. I have set to normal right now, which is the lowest setting available in the game. And let's kick on DLSS and see where it gets us. So quality is going to look the best. And this does get us a noticeable bump here. Let me reset my average on the frame rate counter. And notice here that we're now in the mid to upper 40s. And I've got to say, playing on a controller on my TV, this actually already feels very playable right now. And you know, in some scenes over here, I'm up closer to the mid 50s. It really depends on the exact scene. But this is a fairly demanding area of the game. And that's with the DLSS on quality. Like I said, I could do this playable right here if I'm on a controller, which I feel like the lower frame rates feel a bit smoother on the controller since you don't have quite as demanding of mouse movements. If I really wanted some more performance here, we could try moving over to balanced. Okay, and now we're up in the mid 50s on this scene, and things do feel noticeably smoother. So running around here, we are getting in some scenes here up over 60, so it really depends on your scene, right? Here we're in the 60s. And I would, again, consider this a completely playable game at 4K. Although, again, we're not locking 60 at max settings or anything like that. Thought we might as well end it by showing that if you go back then to older games, like here's The Witcher 3, which, you know, a few years ago would have been considered your top-end graphics type of game. You can see here that I'm able to get right around 60 frames per second. It can drop a bit below. And the settings I'm using here are high with the, I think I turned Hairworks off because that's needlessly demanding for what you get for it, in my opinion. So Hairworks off, but other than that, I'm at the high preset. And then I just went with, I don't really care about my Hairworks rendering. And once again, resetting things there, you can see the frame rate here. We're usually around 60-ish. So basically what I'm getting at here is, can the RTX 2070 game at 4K? Playing older games that are a bit older like this? Absolutely. And in newer games, they're becoming more and more likely to either launch with or get added to them DLSS or FSR. And with FSR going open source, we are actually pretty likely to start seeing mods. We're already seeing mods adding FSR to games that the developers haven't added it to. I think that'll become more and more common moving forwards. So would I buy an RTX 2070 to game at 4K? Probably not, unless you're just stuck on a 4K display and the 2070 is the best you can do. As you can see here, you can still get a pretty good gaming experience. But if I was buying a monitor for an RTX 2070, I'd definitely stick to 1440p as the sweet spot. So can an RTX 2070 game at 4K? I'm going to give it a resounding yes. Even if it's not going to be like the recommended card for 4K, especially moving forward. But moving forward, as long as you're willing to use things like FSR and DLSS, you know, it puts up a pretty good showing. Let me know what you guys all think about this in the comments section, and I hope you all have an excellent day.